We definitely want to thank our presenting sponsors. You can see their logos on the screen. Thank you so much to our sponsors that have stepped up to the plate, not only to support us and our conversation in the nonprofit show, the nonprofit episodes that we have, but also just the sector at large. We see you, we notice you, we hear you, and we're very, very appreciative. So we also, again, I'm Jarrett Ransom, President and CEO of the Raven Group, co-hosting alongside with Julia Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. But when the cat's away, the mice will play. So I'm really excited to play. Today, we've got Heather joining us. And for those of you in the Chitty Chat chat session, you just heard that Heather joins us from Chicago. So Heather Burright, and I hope I said that correctly, is the CEO. Awesome. Thumbs up is always a good sign. CEO of Skill Masters Market. Welcome to you. And thanks so much for joining us, Heather.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And people always wonder about my last name, and it's exactly what it looks like. It's very phonetic.
Very phonetic, just how it looks. I like that. I was like, should I roll my R's? Is it, is it all gone in together? But Heather, we're so glad to have you and talk to us today really about human capital investment. So today's episode, we are talking about those investments that you make in human capital. And so let's just start off, Heather. What is human capital and why are these investments important?
Yeah. So human capital is basically a fancy way of saying your people, right? People used to say human resources, people say talent management, there's all kinds of labels for it, but really it's just your people. And generally your people account for about up to maybe 70% of your operating expenses. So it's a huge part of your organization. But they can only provide, well, they can provide, right? They can provide great benefit to your organization, but in a lot of ways, only if you invest in them. And so I'm excited today to talk about human capital investment and ways that we can do that and the benefits of it. People need certain things to be able to succeed and to help move your organization forward, because in a lot of ways, our organizations are nothing without our people.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. One of the big conversations, of course, that we have in our nonprofit sector is, the pay gap. And I'm not just talking like gender equality or inequality when it comes to, male, female, but just, are we paying our talent, competitive wages as in the other parts, perhaps, of the world, the sectors and all that comes with that. So I'm sure we'll touch a little bit on that as well. But let's talk about investing, right? So back to that investing in human capital, like you said, fancy word for our people. So what is it that we need to think about when it comes to investing in people and benefits?
Yeah, so I believe that, as a leader in your organization, it's your job to create both the environment and the opportunities that your people need to thrive. And so for me, the environment, that's more about the foundational pieces. So investing in your staff can be identifying the competencies or the skills they need to be successful, creating the culture where they want to show up because they feel like they're making a difference, they feel connected, they feel included, like they have a voice. So creating that culture. And then also, I think there's a huge piece here around diversity, equity, and inclusion to make sure that people feel like they belong, both from a policy perspective and from a perception and how they actually feel within the environment. So that to me is kind of the foundational piece in creating that environment. And then there's also the opportunities, which to me is, I focus in on staff development for that, but it could be any number of things. So when I say opportunities, I'm saying things like assessing their skills or assessing their leadership, providing training, so kind of formal opportunities. I personally specialize in the virtual classroom, which is great this time of the year because
Absolutely.
Nobody's in person anymore. But providing training or formal opportunities for them, as well as coaching and some informal support as well. So to me, it's the environment and it's the opportunities. And both of those things have to work together if you want your people to really succeed and drive your mission forward. I think it makes good sense to invest in your staff and your volunteers because they're the ones that are working with the people your nonprofit serves. They're the ones working towards achieving your organizational goals, but it also makes a lot of financial sense to invest in your people. And I'd be happy to share a little bit more about that side of it as well, if you think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I do think that would be helpful. And I'm a very curious person. Julie and I always like to ask just, organic questions that come out of this dialogue. So if you don't mind, before we go there, and maybe that will lead us into more of the conversation, honestly, when I think of, human capital development, those investments, right? And you said really some coursework or skill set enhancements. I think old school terminology, right? It's like professional develop budget. Mm-hmm. So I'm very curious, Heather, if you've seen that professional development budget, like track trend in different ways, in particular, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, because again, I'm going to make a bold statement. I've seen so many organizations make a statement for diversity, equity, inclusion, right, but not put any investment towards the actions thereafter. So certainly don't mean to back you into a corner and, put you in a place where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not prepared to answer this. But I am curious over the last several months, right? We've had a lot change in our world, especially when it comes to our human capital. So talk to me about maybe what that budgeting looks like and how the conversation for this investment in human capital may go.
Yeah, I have not seen any of the data around the budgets at this point. But I think it's important. I think when we think about DEI, some people put it in kind of this compliance category of human resources, and some people put it more in this kind of culture and staff investment category. And for me, I think there are compliance aspects because you want to look at your policies and your procedures. You want to look at your compensation structures and, career development and those kinds of things that might have some compliance components. But to me, it's about investing in your people, making sure that they feel welcome as well, because your policy can be equitable, but how it's implemented or how it's perceived could not be equitable. So I think it's a little bit of both. And I wouldn't even know, I guess for me, I'd have to look at both sides of the budget, to really figure out where it's being invested. But I will say I have seen a huge increase in the number of RFPs as a consultant. I've seen a huge increase in the number of RFPs where people are looking for DEI consultants, somebody who can help them, guide them through that process. Because like you said, a lot of people made statements, but then they looked around and was like, okay, now what, right?
What
like we made this bold statement, we believe it, we want this, but we don't have anybody dedicated to it. We may or may not have a committee that's even focused on this. And so how do we move the needle forward in that way? But it would be interesting to see the budget too.
Yeah. And like you said, really bring it into the culture, fold it into the culture, take it beyond the compliance checkbox of, yes, we have it. Yes, we can check these boxes. And here is how we are truly implementing that practice as well as that policy. So that's why it's also really important for the investing in people as well as those benefits. Now, I know you wanted to talk about some other important factors with that. Does it align with authentically? That's a really hard word to say this morning. Does it align with that, or should we go into another direction, Heather?
No, I just want to share a couple of little data points for anybody who's still questioning, because I think, generally speaking, nonprofits actually spend more per learner than for-profits do. Interesting little fact there. But I think there's always still this tension between, where does the money go? And how can I be sure that if I invest in my staff, that I'll get a return on that investment?
Right.
Especially when we see nonprofits that have a high turnover rate in certain positions, it becomes even more tense to decide how to spend that money. So I was just going to point out a couple of quick data points around investing in your staff. So one is around employee satisfaction and engagement. We know that employee engagement leads to many other benefits within your organization, including client or customer satisfaction. So whoever your customer is in your nonprofit. But we know that that staff development and investing in them in that way increases their satisfaction and their engagement. And 50% of people in one survey said that career advancement opportunities were more important to them than salary.
Really?
So
So
when you
that's
start
that
thinking about,
title, it's the additional responsibilities.
it is giving them opportunities, investing in them, showing them career pathing options. Those are huge benefits that you can provide. So you talk about maybe not being able to be as competitive in a salary perspective, yet there are other ways that we can invest in our staff.
Yeah.
It also can increase staff retention. And I know we've talked a lot, we kind of in the industry have talked a lot about millennials over the past several years, but 70% of millennials say that a lack of leadership development opportunities is what contributed to them to leaving an organization. And
Sure.
then the cost to replace an employee is about 50% of their salary. So let's assume they're making $60,000 a year. They leave to go somewhere else to where they're going to get that leadership development opportunity. And you're going to spend maybe $30,000 to replace them when you could have just invested in them.
Right.
So those are kind of the employee side of things. We also know that it increases productivity, creates higher quality services, can increase your profit margins. So there are tons of reasons to invest in your staff, but I think it's important that we kind of ground ourselves in that. I have a lot of beliefs that that prompt me to do this work, but I think it's also important to look at the business side.
You know, that is so important. And I do think it really does take us into our next point of conversation, because when you invest in us and we feel like we're part of the, the group, we're engaged a little bit more, we show up in a more authentic way, right? At work, in the community, how we serve. So talk to us about this authenticity.
Yeah, so I believe people excel when they know what's expected of them and they can show up authentically at work. And this to me is the foundational stuff. It's creating those environments that I talked about previously. So this is identifying the competencies that they need to be successful and helping them develop those competencies. It's creating that culture where people feel like they can be themselves, where they feel like they can take risks and even fail, but have the opportunity to learn from it. When they feel supported both in their day-to-day as well as their career aspirations. Because again, we want them to feel good where they are now, but we want them to grow. I think it includes making sure that, as we talked about the DEI perspective, making sure that everyone feels included, that your policies match your perceptions, that all voices are not just invited to the table, which is where there was a push to, not just invited to the table, but that those voices are heard and valued and celebrated while they're at the table. I think it's making room for people to learn and grow and facilitating relationships and connections between staff. So it's a lot of that foundational stuff when I say that people need to be able to show up authentically at work. They say that happy employees are more productive. And I personally believe that organizations are better when their people are happier, and people are happier when they feel valued and capable in their roles. And so investing in that foundational stuff can help them feel valued and capable. If they have clear expectations and they feel like they can be fully themselves, they will feel valued and capable in their roles.
And I am so glad you made that point, that it's not about their voices. It's not about having them at the table. It's so much more than that, right? It's not, again, I see it as checking that checkbox. It's really, embracing that culture and diversity. It's embracing and celebrating, different points of views and ideas. And I think that is so valuable. I remember hearing a statistics, and I'm definitely not a big data point person that I can memorize these, but many, many, many years ago, I heard, and I think maybe this may stand true, is most people leave a job because they're really unhappy with their manager, supervisor, boss, fill in the blank, right? So I do still believe that that's a big factor. Is that true?
Yeah, I haven't seen any new data that would change that. I've definitely seen that one where the supervisor is most often cited. I would imagine there might be some new exit interview data, but I can't imagine that would change.
Well, I know, during this time, I, received several calls from a lot of 20, 30, young 40s, year old professionals. And they're like, I am just not in alignment with the culture of my organization, right? They're not willing to take a stand. They're not able to be brave enough. I don't feel like they are aligned with the same values that I come with personally. And so that was one of the reasons, that I had asked about the budget question. What can we account for? Because I do believe that so many of us are just leaning in a lot further than we've ever done before. And so for us to have those resources to invest in our human capital is so critical right now.
Yeah, I think I would wonder if the pandemic had any effect on that as well, because we suddenly found ourselves in this place where our work life and our home life were even more blended than ever before. And
Yes.
so it's a little bit harder, I would say, to compartmentalize than it was before, to say like, okay, that's my job. I'm going to my job. This is my
Right.
home. This is how I am here. And now I think it's easier to see that conflict when those values don't align.
Well, and just like you, I'm assuming you're in your home office, right? And
I
so
am
we're
also
seeing
known as my
this.
entryway.
Right. And that is very authentic, right? We're seeing you, we're seeing Heather. And that's definitely been a place, of the pandemic. And I'm assuming this has a lot to do with empowerment for our employees.
Yeah. I kind of always operate from my belief system. I believe that people are worthy of investment. And I believe that investing in your people makes them feel valued and gives them new skills and a new passion for their work. So I'm going to take training as an example because I do a lot of training work. Let's say you send someone in your staff, you're offering an internal training, you send someone in your staff team to this training and they learn a new skill and they are excited to use that skill. That's awesome, right? And so helpful because they're going to leave that training excited to put that to use and it's going to benefit you in the long run. But they've also built cross-departmental and cross-functional relationships in that process. And they've learned about what other people in your organization do and how they approach their work. So they've expanded their picture of your organization. They didn't just pick up a new skill. Now they're able to tap into other people in your organization more effectively, and they're able to take on someone else's perspective when making decisions, which will result in a better decision. So when you think about empowering your employees, it can show up in any number of ways, but just taking that training example alone, you're investing in them in one way. Maybe you're expecting them to learn a new skill and be able to show up to work with that skill, but you're investing in them in so many more ways than just training.
And what I'm hearing is really you're layering those levels of empathy and connection, right? You're really building and deepening that commitment to your cause because now they are able to come in a more empowered manner. And really, I just see this layering of involvement with different parts of the community, parts of the cause, parts of, your organization itself. And not to mention many of our organizations, Heather, right, are also small organizations. So often we're wearing those multiple hats.
Right. Absolutely. I want to live in a world where people find meaning and connection in the work that they do, and where nonprofits have the leaders they need to succeed because of it. So to me, it's investing in your organization by investing in your people.
I couldn't have said it better. There's no wonder that you do what you do because of your belief system. And I stand true to that as well. That's very much my North Star is that belief system. And what about when it comes to setting these expectations? And I'm assuming this is twofold. This is employee and employer and how they're set together.
Yes. Yeah. So this is sort of my sweet spot. My background is learning and leadership development. I came from a national nonprofit before starting my consulting business where I owned the proprietary competency model and helped identify what skills people would need at different levels within the organization, and then created all of the resources that were needed to hire and onboard and develop them with those skills in mind. So expectations is kind of my sweet spot. I wish that every nonprofit would have the opportunity to identify their expectations for their staff and their volunteers. They say the biggest killer of performance is unclear expectations.
Oh,
So
yeah.
when you talk about wanting people to thrive, this in and of itself is a huge step that you can take. I've seen it happen so many times, and I have given instructions that weren't clear, and I have received instructions that weren't clear, right? Nobody wants to be in that position. Let's say that you're in with your supervisor for a meeting, and your supervisor says, I need you to create some messages that really promote the benefits of one of our programs, right? And then you go back to your desk and you're thinking, yeah, sounds great. No problem. I do this all the time. That's my job. And then you get back to your desk and you're like, ooh, who is the message for?
Right. What did they ask me to do?
Right.
Where is it going?
Where are the messages going to be used? How many messages do I need to create? And suddenly, especially if that person is no longer available to answer questions, suddenly you're guessing. And then let's say you make the assumption that it's for the audience of the program, right? It's to recruit new program participants. And so you create those messages. And let's say you assume it's going to be on social media. So you create those messages. And then you finally go back and you turn your work in to, I think that's my Southern speak of submit your work to your boss or whoever. And they say you totally missed the mark. Because what they meant was they wanted messages to go into a report that they were providing to their donor.
Right. Big difference. Big misalignment.
It's a big difference. And so they did not meet expectations because the expectations were not clear. I think people generally want to succeed and they want your organization to succeed. They just don't always know how. So for me, when we talk about setting expectations, I like to start at the very beginning. Let's look at your organization's strategic plan. What are you trying to achieve? And then identify what people need to do to help you achieve that. And I focus very heavily on the do. I don't really want to know what they need to know. I want to know what they need to do, because if we focus in on the do, we'll fill in the gaps of knowledge. So identify what it is they need to do. And then those actions coupled with the how are the expectations.
Yeah.
And then you can prioritize those actions. If there, are a bunch of them, sometimes that happens in larger organizations, especially, or in a smaller really small organization where one person is doing a lot of tasks.
Most of it, yes.
So prioritize those actions for those that are most essential, and then communicate those expectations and train to those expectations. And this is maybe a little bit where I'm different as well. Start with the why. So just like Simon Sinek points out in his book, Start with the Why, that businesses need a clear why, so do adult learners. So when you're going to go back and you're going to take those actions and you're going to prioritize those and communicate those and train to those are all great things. And that's, again, where I thrive. And so I get really excited about that. But start with the why.
Start with the why. Always the why. I could echo that forever. Now, I'm a little remiss, Heather, because this whole conversation, we've really talked about our employees. Does this carry over into other stakeholder groups? Because they really are our workforce, right? Our volunteers, our board members, our donors. Like, how does this conversation carry into those other levels of impact?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. I think the same principles apply, whether you're working with volunteers, program type volunteers, or you're working with board volunteers. I think even other partners that you might be bringing in can fit into this as well. So I think the principles apply no matter what. People want to feel valued. They want to feel heard. They want to feel like they're a part of the mission. They want to know what's expected of them. That exists no matter what their role is within the organization. I think how you approach it, how you invest in them, how you present the information might be a little bit different, whether they're staff or volunteers. But overall, same principles.
Yeah. And setting those expectations with all stakeholder groups, right, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think all of this has just been super wonderful. We are close to our end, but before we do wrap up, Heather, tell us a little bit about, Skill Masters. You started with maybe you didn't start, but you were with a national organization. You shared that. What is it like to work with you? And really, back to that sweet spot, how is it that you help the sector?
Yeah, so, I personally think that most, probably all, but for sake of being inclusive, right? Most nonprofits want to stand out. They want to achieve their mission and goals, and they want to build trust and credibility. And they can't do that without strong staff, strong leaders at all levels of the organization, whether they're a small nonprofit or a large nonprofit. And so I work with nonprofits and really help them identify and cultivate the skills that their leaders need to move their mission forward. I do work in both the foundational, kind of that environment and opportunities level. So I do provide services around competencies, culture, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as staff development through assessments, training, and coaching.
Perfect. And your LinkedIn profile looks really great. So for those of you watching live as well as the recording, so again, you can find us on Roku, Fire TV, our Vimeo channel, of course, and reach out to Heather. She's got a really, she's got a great profile. She's got a lot of information on her website. Skill Masters Market is where it's at to find Heather. And Heather, it's just been really wonderful to talk about this because I don't think we talk about our human capital investments enough. I really don't. When we think about resources, I really, hear the majority of it going into, the money that we bring in from our community, our programs and how they're being implemented. But you have to think that the engine behind running all of this are our people. So how do we retain our rock star people?
Yeah. It's so important. It's so important. And I think taking these steps, creating that culture, creating that environment, and then providing them with the opportunities to develop and see not just their current role, but a career with your organization. So important.
Well, and I do a lot of executive coaching, and I always say, and I tell the person that hires me, which is typically a board member or the CEO, depending on the size of the organization. And I am very honest, and I say, I coach the person, right? And it might mean that through these levels of conversations, they may identify a goal within the community that may actually move them beyond this organization. But one of my belief systems, Heather, is really we invest in our human capital that supports our community, right? It supports our community at large.
It's so true. And people sometimes think about that staff turnover. Oh, if I develop them, they're going to leave me. They're going to go somewhere else. And they think about that as an end, but that's a whole new beginning because that person is leaving you potentially as a donor, as a volunteer, as a future board member.
A collaborator, right.
Yes, yes.
There's so many ways. And again, I believe, truly in that human capital investment for their greatest good, that individual's greatest good. And so again, that's one of the things that I'm always very honest about is that I coach the person. Everything you share with me is safe. Of course, I'm coaching through the contract of the organization with your highest potential in mind. So yes. Thank you, Heather. This has been wonderful. Again, here's Heather's information, CEO of Skill Masters Market. You can check her out on her website and then also connect with her on LinkedIn. She's got a lot of really good stuff going on. And I'm so glad that we have you in our sector, Heather, to really bring this conversation to light. And it's just been really wonderful to be here with you. Julia will be back tomorrow. Julia will be back tomorrow. Make sure you join us tomorrow. I will also be here. Jarrett Ransom, the nonprofit nerd, CEO of the Raven Group. Still want to say thank you to our amazing sponsors. I always like to say, go and find them online and give them some love and just let them know that they're doing great work. They definitely believe in the work that we're all doing in the community. So go ahead and tell them thank you as well. So just as we end every show, we are so appreciative for all of you joining us today, again, live or through the recording. You can find us there. I want to say, Heather, this might be our 216th show. So I know we are just getting up there. We started in the middle of the March, not quite sure what we were doing, but started then. And thank you for joining us. And we hope to have you back on. So join us tomorrow. Everybody come back on tomorrow. Join Julia and me. And until then, as we end every show, please stay well so that you can do well. Have a great week. And thanks again, Heather. We appreciate